The first scene of the movie focuses on a group of close friends who are celebrating the beginning of spring break by throwing a party at the beach with some of their fellow students. Vance and Gilbert, two of the boys, find a giant ball covered in a strange gooey substance. This occurs at the same time that one of the friends, Heather, is filming the party with her video camera. In the midst of the celebration, a young man established a new rule according to which no one present could use their mobile phones under any circumstances. The celebration continues, but all of the guests are required to put away their phones so that the event cannot be streamed live online. Therefore, he gathered up all of their mobile devices and stored them in the trunk of the vehicle. Two of the pals, Kaylee and Mitch, wake up the next morning on the lifeguard building. Jonah, who is Kaylee's boyfriend, is played by Dean Geyer, and he wakes up in a nearby car next to a female named Chanda. Vance and Ronnie, who is Vance's girlfriend, are sitting in the trunk of the automobile. There is no sign of the other youngsters, including Heather. All that is left behind is a collection of unused sleeping bags and beach blankets in the area where they were last seen. Marcia, who was still somewhat groggy, made an attempt to rise from the chair. Marcia had already walked on the sand to the point where she felt a sudden weight on her feet before Kaylee yelled at her to keep away from it, but Kaylee instantly shouted at her to do so. It appeared as though a magnet was drawing her farther and farther into the sand. When everyone saw Marcia's condition, they all became quite anxious. During that period, Vance made an effort to assist Marcia. He leaped out of the automobile quickly, but all of a sudden his legs felt heavy, and he found himself being drawn into the sand along with it. Vance's face, which was turned toward the sand, began to be gnawed by something until it was ripped and bleeding. Vance's face was facing the sand. It didn't take long until Vance and Marcia went down with the ship and vanished. They couldn't believe that they would have to say goodbye to two of their friends so early that morning. They had intended to call the police station, but they have now discovered that their mobile phone is in the trunk of the vehicle. The guilt was placed on Mitch because he was the one who suggested gathering using smartphones. In addition to this, it was discovered that they had illegally accessed the beach, which was closed to the public since the water in the ocean was contaminated. Jonah, who was a passenger in the vehicle, made an attempt to start the engine. However, it was discovered that the car battery had run out of juice, and he had neglected to replace it before departing for the beach. The vehicle did not have any ability to move forward at all. Kaylee, who was fascinated by the critter buried in the sand, decided to use her hands to coax it out of its hiding place. Indeed, the unusual creature appeared to be extremely thin and had a hair-like shape. Gilbert, one of their mutual friends, had just awoken from his slumber to find that he was imprisoned in a garbage can. Gilbert's efforts to escape the garbage can consisted primarily of his vigorously shaking the barrel. Immediately, his friends yelled at him to stay still and not make any movements at all. Jonah finds the shattered egg on the sand at the edge of the shore, and he draws the conclusion that whatever emerged from the egg burrowed under the sand throughout the night and murdered everyone there, including Vance, Heather, and Marcia. In order to determine the size of the beast, Mitch and Kaylee throw uncooked hot dogs from one end of the beach to the other. The gang gets their hopes up when one of the hot dogs doesn't sink into the sand, but they soon realize that the goal is simply out of their reach. The next thought that occurred to Jonah was to steal the items that were in Marcia's purse. There are two surfboards located in the trunk of the automobile for Jonah to use as walking devices. He started by putting one surfboard at a time on the stairs. Jonah was standing on a surfboard when it began to shift and move further away from the chair as he got closer to it. Jonah made an effort to prevent any part of his body from coming into contact with the sand, but the monster instead emerged from the sand on the beach and touched Jonah's stomach. He was fortunate to live and was able to save himself by jumping into a chair. However, the monster's teeth left wounds in his stomach, which were wounded as a result. Jonah has the appearance of a sick person who is making a valiant effort to bear the suffering. He described the sensation in his stomach as being similar to that of having been stung by hundreds of jellyfish. Jonah checked the contents of Marcia's bag while he was taking the pain medication and discovered several canned beverages. Jonah poured drinking water over each of his companions in turn as he went through the group. Unanticipatedly, he tossed the drink towards Mitch, which caused the edge of the wooden handle next to him to bump and come dangerously close to detaching. The cut on Jonah's stomach was becoming worse and was starting to fester. Jonah, who was in a lot of discomfort, had no choice but to lie down on the chair. It was becoming more and more unclear to the five of them how they could possibly live on the beach. They were compelled to remove the mobile phone from its hiding place in the trunk of the vehicle. In addition, Ronnie intends to open the trunk of the automobile by stepping on the bumper of the vehicle. However, as soon as the trunk began to open, there was an abrupt honking sound coming from a nearby police car. Ronnie abruptly lost her balance, and during the fall, she hooked her right finger in the trunk of the automobile. The individual works as a lifeguard. He wanted to know exactly why Kaylee and her pals were on this beach that was restricted to the public. If there's anything buried beneath the sand of this beach, Kaylee will let you know. The stunned members of the Coast Guard climbed out of the car as soon as they could. Surprisingly, the creature that was buried in the sand couldn't injure the man's leg when it tried to bite it. They did not understand how the man managed to walk without sustaining any injuries. It turned out that the man's protection from the monster came from the leather shoes he was wearing. The Coast Guard requested that Kaylee and Mitch come down to him, but it was obvious that neither of them wanted to do so. When the Coast Guard found out, they were irate and threatened to pepper spray the people. Unhappily, the man's car key ended up in the sand as it dropped. He reached for his vehicle keys, but almost immediately his hands began to feel heavy, and he was unable to move in any way. It started with his hands getting pulled into the sand. The lifeguard pulled out some pepper spray and used it to spray the monster that had erupted from the sand as soon as it appeared. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard had to have part of one of their arms severed, and they were seriously bleeding. After he had fallen, the sand began to engulf him. Kaylee and her pals were at the beach when an occurrence occurred, which made them realize they needed to put their shoes on and quickly leave the area. After that, Chanda slung her towel in Mitch's direction. However, Mitch fell because the edge of the wood was not properly secured. Mitch, who was resting on the beach, started to disappear as the monster began to eat away at him. His hands and feet started to make their way into the sand while his companions could only watch helplessly since they were unable to intervene. Kaylee is in the midst of a frenzy when, all of a sudden, she has a fantastic idea. After handing the ledge to Chanda, who was already inside the car, Kaylee leaped from the lifeguard's home into the waiting vehicle. After that, they assisted Ronnie in releasing her finger from the pinch. After sustaining an injury to his finger, Ronnie promptly had a large towel wrapped around the wound. Gilbert's body was constricted on one side, and this caused him to experience pain and heavy bleeding on the other side of his body. After that, Kaylee and Chanda positioned the wood out of the way so that they could move closer to the chair where Jonah was sitting. Chanda moved slowly across the room while preserving her equilibrium. Thankfully, she was successful. After that, Kaylee made her way over, and she finally arrived. But when it was Ronnie's time, the sand beneath her feet caused her to stumble and fall. Ronnie was quickly drawn into the sand after being surrounded by the group of monsters. In addition, nobody realized it at the time, but the monster was making an attempt to get into the garbage can where Gilbert was hiding. The thought occurs to Chanda that she could follow the instructions that Mitch had given her earlier and go to the patrol car. After that, she put a towel around both of her legs and raced to the police car. It's incredible that she was able to pull it off. However, Gilbert could not take it any longer. He expelled the blood from his mouth in a measured manner. It was discovered that the monster had created a hole and had entered the garbage can through the opening in the base. Gilbert was gone in an instant after being pulled into the sand and disappearing. Chanda was knocked unconscious as a result of a brain injury she had after falling and hitting her head. Kaylee and Jonah have no choice but to wait it out till Chanda comes to and snaps out of her trance. Then it was night. After Chanda passed out from exhaustion, she returned to her senses and discovered a lifeboat perched on the police car. In an instant, Chanda flung the lifeboat until it inflated, and then she snatched up Kaylee and Jonah. She didn't even stop to think about it. When they got to the car, it seemed like Jonah was already in a lot of pain. An enormous beast that resembled the tentacles of an octopus suddenly emerged from within the sand where it had been hiding. It appeared as though the creature was glowing in the dark. After then, the tentacles launched their assault on Kaylee. Kaylee was able to come up with a solution when she took a container that was full of gasoline and poured it out across the surface of the sand. This time, she was aware that it was imperative for her to eliminate the creature. Therefore, by using the match to start the fire, it was finally possible to set the monster on fire. Kaylee was fortunate enough to escape the horrific monster's onslaught since she was able to get into the automobile in time. While everything was going on, the injured Jonah was unable to contain himself any longer. He, too, had to die. Kaylee kissed his hand one final time. The following morning, the girls are roused from their sleep by a guy named Michael Huntsman, who inquires as to whether or not they are all right. Kaylee and Chanda get out of the car and go to the beach, where they see that the thing has disappeared, leaving behind just a crater with a circumference of around 100 yards and a depth of approximately 2 feet all around the lifeguard tower and the beach patrol truck. As Kaylee and Chanda, who are both shaken up, make their way off the beach, the man places a call for an ambulance. In the final photo, the monster, which is later determined to be a gigantic poisonous jellyfish, can be seen swimming beneath the sea a great distance away and heading towards another packed beach in Santa Monica. The unfortunate beachgoers who are about to become the next casualty are those who are currently there.